you know what would fix that reputation, or at least go a long way to fixing their reputation overnight? What better gesture than to, freezing the assets of known war criminals, who are using the Mauritian banking system to clean money. The people that I work with, particularly civil society organizations from the countries that where the crimes are being committed, those are the people taking the big risk.
Mikel, thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's quite rare that we have a foreigner who's not an expat on the podcast, so it's a real pleasure to have you. So my first question is, why are you here in Mauritius?
For the beaches and for the cocktails? No.
One can tell that you've got some sun.
Indeed. Well, yeah, after 3 days in conference, I had to go out and see the sun. But yeah, we're here as part of an initiative from the Wayamo Foundation to try to build a coalition of prosecutors and investigators and judges committed to ending impunity for international crimes.
Okay. And what you mentioned Wayamo, so what is Wayamo?
Yeah, so Wayamo is a legal foundation based out of Berlin, but also offices in Ghana and Nairobi. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the idea behind Wayamo is really to kind of operate in the shadow of the International Criminal Court and help complement the work of that court by encouraging domestic criminal proceedings on international crimes. Okay. So the idea behind the International Criminal Court is that it focuses squarely on, crimes against humanity, genocide, war crimes, crimes of aggression. But it's just one institution. And the way that it was designed was that, it would take certain cases, emblematic cases dealing with the gravest perpetrators. But the idea was that the domestic system would then follow and try mid-level perpetrators and everything, because these crimes don't happen in isolation and they're not just one-offs. But what's happened so far in the history of the court of 20 years now is that domestic follow-up isn't happening. And so, yeah, the idea behind Wayamo is to really try to encourage it and provide the training and support that prosecutors and judges need so that they can take this mandate on themselves and then no longer need to rely on these institutions to kind of do the heavy lifting.
So is it a lot of capacity building then?
It's a lot of capacity building, yeah, but there are some more ambitious projects like, what we're doing right now with this concept of universal jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm. What is universal jurisdiction for the layman?
Yeah, so it sounds like something almost like with superpowers and magical. But actually, it's just a single provision in most people's statutes. So if you have signed what they call the Rome Statute, so giving the ICC jurisdiction, becoming a state party to that treaty, you're meant to also pass implementing legislation, so to make those crimes also national crimes. So right now, as we speak, if you were to commit crimes against humanity, you would be breaking Mauritian law, because the Mauritian government has passed the International Crimes Act, and in so doing, had made those laws also national laws. And at the same time, because they're national laws, there is guidance on how you can exercise jurisdiction. And one of those ways, of course, is the crimes were committed by Mauritians or against Mauritians, but then also if they were committed abroad, but the perpetrator is on Mauritian territory. And so this is the idea behind universal jurisdiction. So even a Mauritian judge and a Mauritian prosecutor could actually try crimes committed in Sudan, for example, or anywhere in the world, if the perpetrator finds him or herself on the territory of Mauritius. And so we are kind of trying to build this coalition to create basically no-go zones for criminals, states who have already basically signaled that they are committed to this fight, taking it a step further. And it's particularly interesting in the context of Mauritius because it's one of the premier banking hubs of the world, but particularly of the continent. And yeah, there's a lot of ways to commit crimes, and aiding and abetting them through financing and various other things is a key way. And that's one of the areas where, quoting a friend of mine, Nataraj Munasamy,
he did warn me before he came. If he uses that term, he has to give me credit for it.
I'm giving him all of the credits. It was his term, but shy of criminal prosecutions in Mauritius, we can also disrupt criminal behavior. by getting in the way, making it harder. And that's already a big contribution.
Okay. And how are you seeing you've come here specifically in the context of that conference. How are you seeing the traction? Is there an appetite, if I may call it like that, we need to do something about it. This is an issue, a global issue.
Of all of the prosecutors and all the judges that we've spoken to so far, I would say that the statement made by the Mauritian DPP was one of the strongest, and basically committing to the idea that committing international crimes, and prosecuting them is in the public interest of Mauritians, right? Because and again, we're not talking about petty crimes. We're talking about crimes against humanity, right? And then taking that on and saying that, if resources are allocated from, public prosecution to combat these crimes or, contribute to the combating of these crimes, it easily passes the public interest test because Mauritians in general have an interest in ending impunity worldwide. And that's a strong statement, that's leadership. He didn't have to say that, but again, it shows his commitment to accountability and to ending impunity.
But it must be, prior to Wayamo, if I'm not mistaken, you were at the ICC yourself for about 10 years. And I did ask that to Nat when he was on the podcast, because he was there for 5 years, that it must be, it's a bit of a personal question, but does it take a toll, an emotional toll on you? Because we're talking, and I'm not trying to diminish petty crimes, or crimes are crimes, but it's such, the magnitude of it is so great, and sometimes from a layman's perspective, you must feel a bit helpless to some extent. Or do you feel that actually every little helps? So, every little that you do is a step towards fighting against impunity and crimes against humanity?
Yeah, my job at the International Criminal Court was to find and identify victims of these crimes, wherever they lived, explain to them that they have rights, even though their rights were trampled on in the commission of crimes. And then kind of help them access this process, right? This criminal process, all the way through to reparations. And part of engaging with victim communities also means, hearing their stories. And so, I think it's true for myself and for all of my colleagues who work in this field that there's certainly an emotional toll. But there's also a kind of benefit that you wouldn't necessarily appreciate. And that is like when you hear fellow human beings endure, great hardship, and then still get up in the morning and still have commitment towards accountability and various other things, also feeding and providing for families and things, despite, what you would think would normally, topple most of us. It surges, at least me, and I know, colleagues like that, it provides a certain wind in our sails. Like, how dare we kind of complain about the lack of progress or, the lack of wins when this person gets up in the morning having lost everything. And so, I think it while there are some emotional costs to it, there's also some benefits in being exposed to these heroes.
Yeah, I remember having that feeling when a few years ago, I did a financial project, but a project in Rwanda, visiting some of the places that we visited and talking some of people who were refugees but then came back to their country to give back to their country. It's, that hearing their tale of resilience gives you a lot of hope and provides a lot of inspiration, because it makes our everyday trouble seems quite small in comparison. It's a virtuous circle, because, hearing their tales is giving you more impetus to do more. And you have I spoke about Rwanda, but you have a particular focus on Sudan. Yeah. And have you always had that, even at the ICC?
At the ICC, I worked in a number of different countries. So I worked in Kenya, Eastern DRC, the Republic of Georgia. But then my last big case was in Sudan. And in fact, I was there in the last coup in 2021 in Darfur. And was stuck there for quite a while.
Oh, wow.
Because the coup was obviously unexpected. And actually it was that moment and the time that was spent, extra time spent with the affected community, that kind of, solidified my decision to quit the ICC and come and try and do something along the lines of what we're doing now. Because you could see, I mean, a lot of the conversations that you have, and there's only so many you can have and
Sure.
maintain the same trajectory,
Sure.
which is affected community leaders and stuff coming and asking, okay, so how is this process going to go? You know, even if we succeed in securing a conviction, for us, that's only half the coin with respect to justice. You can't just wash your hands and say, okay, well, job done. We're still in IDP camps. Hundreds of thousands of us. We need to get home. And part of that must be, you know, part of the reparation solution, which must, you know, and their particular demands were to return home. And one of the reasons that I got so excited about this particular opportunity was that of all the situations that I ever worked on, this was the first where we had a victim community that was super well organized, super well represented, and then at the same time where the solution wasn't intractable. The persons who had pushed them off their land were nomadic, or semi-nomadic, and therefore didn't hold the land. And that meant that there was a potential solution to this, right? And so that was what we were 100% committed to trying to resolve. Seeing if we could sort of feint a domestic legal action to try to, in property, using an international criminal law judgment to basically say that these people were wrongfully removed from their land, and that it had been certified internationally. So, and begging for injunctive relief, and if it didn't come, then at least pushing then for a political solution.
Right.
But then the civil war broke out last year in April, and then obviously, you know, with the entire court system and all the entire states just falling apart, we had to pivot to what we're doing now, which is trying to create, for lack of a better term, traps for perpetrators of international criminal law violations, not making it easy for them to be able to, you know, go to neighboring countries to, you know, put their families, to buy land, to even re-equip and refuel and do all these other things, making it harder. And that's the idea now.
You've been there for 3 years?
Yeah, Wayamo. Yeah, 2 years.
And have you seen the kind of, you know, you obviously left the ICC with a particular purpose because you wanted to have more impact on the ground. And have you seen the I wouldn't say success, I guess it's always a work in progress, but have you seen a positive evolution in terms of the work you're trying to do?
What I've seen is that really encouraging responses from the legal community in the region. That's something we didn't expect, and I think that there was a lot of pessimism and cynicism that, you know, universal jurisdiction is practiced in Europe for a reason. And it was really nice to disprove that and to show, in fact, that there are lawyers as competent, if not more competent, in East Africa. And then there's nothing particularly complicated about international criminal law. As much as, you know, we lawyers try to make things more complicated so that we can protect our little castles.
Sure.
Actually, for the entire enterprise to succeed, there has to be engagement from the rest of the world. And so, yeah, that's the most encouraging thing to see. You know, we have champions coming out from the judiciary in Kenya and Uganda, and now, you know, hopefully Mauritius. Lawyers, prosecutors saying, you know, enough. Because by you committing crimes and then bringing, you know, either refugee flows or, you know, illicit financial transactions to our territory, you are interfering with us, right? This idea in the past that, well, African countries didn't want to, you know, interfere diplomatically or politically in each other's business. Well, that interference is now coming to your shores, right? Sure. And especially countries like Kenya, like Mauritius, who are really, you know, going out there and trying to solicit foreign direct investment and, you know, get into that middle income status, you know, and continue to develop. What better way to, you know, solicit that, you know, that big foreign direct investment than to show the rest of the world that you're committed to, you know, the rule of law. Yeah. Because that's ultimately what the private sector wants to see, right? So do it in the public space, you know, and the same benefits that European countries get for doing the same thing, there's no reason that it couldn't happen in Kenya or Mauritius.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting that you mentioned the private sector, because that was going to be my next question. Because and correct me if I'm wrong, the conference that you've had was mainly, you know, with prosecutors and other people from, I presume, the public sector. What would you hope to see from private citizens as a, say, for example, the private legal community or financial institutions, but from the private sector? How can their behavior, or will they have to take the lead from the public sector?
Well, I mean, I think in certain spaces, I mean, pursuing criminal liability will
Sure,
always be the
of
domain
course.
of the
Yeah.
DPP.
Yeah.
But the banking sector in particular, I mean, I think it's a cultural decision that needs to be made in Mauritius, right? Do we want to go down the path of banking secrecy and be some kind of weird haven for, illicit funds? Or do we want to do things, according to the rule of law and then project those values around the world and let everyone know that this is a safe and secure banking sector, but at the same time, not one where you can wash money, and have resources and assets go into financing, illicit activity. And I think that there's a strong case to be made. There's a greater arc in terms of success and in terms of, development on doing things in the appropriate way.
Yeah.
And I think even Mauritians have experienced like what happens when their banking sector gets negative ratings. It just limits the opportunities, and why? For short-term gain?
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense to me.
Of course. And also what we've seen, I mean, we've experienced it firsthand. As you know, we were on the blacklist for a while. We've come off it, but it has long-term consequences because it creates a perception and an image that will last far longer than you being off the list, because then it takes you much more time having to unwind that negative perception that people may have. So I think I completely agree with you that it requires a cultural shift, because it requires this shift in mindset that, we're a country not rich in natural resources. So our, what we call global business sector had been, our pride and joy for a long time, for 30 years now. But I think what we Mauritians need to realize, particularly in that sector, is that the rules of the game have changed, and what used to be acceptable for 30, 40, 50 years ago, banking secrecy being one of them, the world looks completely different. And now people have more sophisticated ways of laundering money, on committing financial crimes. And if we don't keep up with that, sooner or later we will, and once our reputation is damaged, then it's going to be, not irreparable, but very, very hard to come back from that. Yeah.
Do you know what would fix that reputation, or at least go a long way to fixing their reputation overnight? What better gesture than to, freezing the assets of known war criminals, who are using the Mauritian banking system to clean money. That's a strong statement. Standing behind the DPP as he's pursuing these kinds of accountability, and instead of getting stonewalled, having a banking sector that's cooperating. That would send a strong message to the whole world that, if you're in illicit trade or activity,
don't
bother coming here. Yeah. It's too big of a risk.
Yeah.
Nothing, resuscitates a reputation than that, better than that, I would say.
Have you seen throughout your career we're talking about more and more sophisticated means now. We're talking about, there's blockchain and crypto, and so are criminals becoming more savvy? And, because before we used to think, I think, international crimes in terms of physical acts, but now with the financial system becoming more sophisticated, I think there are crimes way beyond perhaps our imagination that can be committed.
That's true. It's an arms race, to be honest. The modern forms of technology that are being used to, further the commission of crimes are also being used to facilitate accountability. Because, social media is, as it is, we have perpetrators now who are going and bragging about crimes on YouTube. That didn't exist, even 10 years ago. But now we also have AI, and the onset of AI, raising questions about the veracity of this form of information, right? Is this a real video? Has it been doctored? And then we have judges, of course, who tend to be, in the criminal law sector, who tend to be, how can I say it in a politically sensitive way? Perhaps not the most progressive when it comes to modern forms of, technological development.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
So there is this kind of tension, right, where, the mode in which crimes are being committed becomes more and more sophisticated. And then the evidence by which, you have to illustrate how these crimes are committed is also very complicated. And if you don't have a legal sector that's competing with, or at least, evolving with the times and developing these skill sets and these reflexes, then you're going to have a problem, right? So when you have a prosecutor who's presenting all this very technically savvy information, and then a defense counsel can just say, oh, this has all been doctored in AI. If the judge doesn't know the difference, you're in trouble.
Understand.
Right? But yeah, I mean, at the same time, I think like part of the message that we just gave, during the conference is that the prevalence of this information, the prevalence of this technology is not going to abate. It's only going to become more prevalent. So there's no kind of option really other than to upskill ourselves with these latest developments. Luckily, there's a lot of civil society organizations who are really bent towards this, right? Like they're using all of the massive data sets out there rather than just, trying to make a quick buck on AI, are actually using it to help us track this criminal behavior in ways that are super sophisticated and then whittle it down to a way that laymen can understand. So yeah, there's, like I say, an arms race. But,
amazing.
yeah.
So it's not, I completely understand what you're saying. So it's not just a question of upskilling the prosecutors or even the judiciary. You need to have all stakeholders be, catching up to some extent.
I mean, what we'll see now, I think, going forward is that, rather than even prosecuting services and investigators kind of having this skill in-house, you're going to see a lot of more collaboration with kind of bespoke, specialized, civil society organizations that do this work.
Right.
Because it changes so fast. By the time you invested in an investigator to have these skill sets, like that form of technology is already outdated.
Yeah.
And we already saw like some of the experts who are explaining this are 25 years old.
That's amazing.
It's confronting, especially in the legal community, to have someone hold themselves out as an expert at 25. But that's
very humbling as well for the
Also, but I think everyone in the room was sitting there just nodding, going, "Wow, you can do that! You can do that with a property register! Oh my gosh,
Wow."
So yeah, it's interesting, but we're not alone, and that's the message. With all of that kind of criminality going into the dark spaces of the web, there are those heroes out there following them.
So if you were to give, we have a lot of young people watching us, so if you were to give a piece of advice for kind of a young aspiring lawyer who's interested in a career in international criminal law, what advice would you have for them in terms of what it takes to at least kickstart their career?
I think domestic experience is the most important, but have a wider lens, right? Commit to the fight of ending impunity in Mauritius.
Yeah.
But at the same time, be alive to the fact that, you're an island and a lot of things are coming here. Human trafficking is happening. People are laundering money, but not just laundering money. That is just one aspect of the crime. What are they doing with that money once, where did it come from? What crimes were committed to elicit those funds? And that's where a prosecutor these days, I think, can have, hone the skills and the craft in the domestic space, but then have these wonderful opportunities to get into a bigger fight. Join your colleagues, on the continent who are fighting this fight. Provide that piece of the puzzle that, impact that comes from Mauritius, the banking and the finances, and then be part of something bigger, right? And contribute to, the overall goal of ending, impunity for these massive crimes.
Did you ever feel unsafe?
Sure. But to be honest, rather than tell war stories about those kinds of things, I would say that like the people that I work with, particularly civil society organizations from the countries that the crimes are being committed, those are the people taking the big risks. And they have the most to lose, they have also the most to gain. They're the most committed to the fight. People like me fly in and out.
But they live there.
They live there. And they're the easiest to target, they're the easiest to find. Yeah, and the impact of the crime really is personal. So I think, those are where the real heroes are. The civil society actors fighting this fight day in and day out.
Last question for you, Mikel. That's normally my first question, but I left it to last because I wanted to hear your story first. What is your why?
My why? That's a good question. Yeah, maybe perhaps best left for last. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, at the end of the day, I come from Miami. It's a place of, that prides itself in sort of material ostentation. And actually it was quite a privilege to see that, because you could see quite clearly that those who managed to achieve and accumulate great deals of wealth didn't strike me as either happy, nor have they done anything that was that laudable for me. So in the end of the day, if you kind of see yourself through to the end, like, do you want to be known as someone who accumulated wealth for yourself and perhaps, you know, for your family, or do you want to be, say, someone who's done something meaningful, right? To advance the project of, you know, humanity. And that sounds a little bit grandiose, and I don't necessarily need to hit that bar, but I'd like to be in a coalition of like-minded human beings who are just always pushing, you know, for us to be better, our better angels and not our darker ones. And so I suppose that's the why. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm glad I asked that question, because I hesitated slightly, but I know you're off to Kenya next, so keep on doing the great work that you're doing. And I'm sure we'll see more traction here. And we've got an excellent DPP here, DPP's office. They are some of the most hardworking people that I know. Sometimes I think globally, sometimes people make fun of civil servants because they think they have an easy job, but they are extremely hardworking, they're extremely committed. So thank you for the value that you've added.
Thanks for having me on, Joanne. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.